On March 15, 1895, inside a small cottage in rural Ireland, a man forced his wife to the floor, doused her in lamp oil, and set her on fire. He did this while 9 of their closest family members stood in the room and watched. When the case reached a packed Victorian courtroom, the outcome was equally disturbing. The husband, Michael Cleary, was convicted of manslaughter rather than murder because the court accepted that he had acted entirely without malice. His lawyers argued that Michael was completely convinced he was not killing his wife. He believed he was executing a changeling, a fairy imposter that had stolen Bridget's face and taken her place in their home. This raises a difficult question. How did an ancient piece of folklore successfully rationalize horrific domestic violence in a modern court of law? To understand how a community could watch a woman burn, we have to look at the woman herself. At 26 years old, Bridget Cleary was a societal anomaly. She was a successful dressmaker who earned her own money, and she owned a Singer sewing machine, state-of-the-art technology for a rural village. She wore gold earrings and kept her own flock of hens. In the insular, deeply traditional village of Ballyvadlea, this financial independence was conspicuous. Her success, combined with the fact that she was childless after 8 years of marriage, fueled deep suspicions among her neighbors. There was also the matter of her home. The Cleary's cottage was built directly on a rath, an ancient Iron Age ring fort. Local folklore held that at these sites, the boundary between the human world and the fairy world grew thin. Bridget's defiance of traditional gender roles, combined with her cottage's haunting location, created a simmering baseline of supernatural anxiety. In the eyes of the village, the environment was already primed for a disaster. In early March, Bridget caught a severe chill that rapidly developed into a respiratory illness, likely bronchitis or pneumonia. She suffered a high fever and began to ramble in the unrecognizably glassy, unfocused way common in states of delirium. Modern medicine categorizes these behaviors as an altered mental state brought on by a physical infection. But the village did not have a medical framework for her decline. Bridget's elderly great-uncle, Jack Dunn, interpreted her fevered rambling as proof of a changeling. He claimed that Bridget's eyes had changed and that the woman in the bed was a fairy substitute. This specific diagnosis infected her husband, Michael. He abruptly stopped seeing his wife's illness as a medical crisis and began viewing every cough and every glassy stare as supernatural evidence of an imposter. The tragedy became inevitable the moment the community chose to treat a fever as a supernatural invasion. Psychiatrists recognize this as Capgras delusion. A person identifies a loved one's face, but the severed emotional connection creates the conviction they are an identical imposter. Michael Cleary's paranoia and obsessive testing mapped directly to these criteria, a Capgras break filtered through the era's mythology. This delusion then became communal through a shared psychotic disorder. In highly isolated, high-stress groups, the delusions of one individual can become contagious, drawing others into the same break from reality. 9 people joined Michael in his attempt to cure Bridget. They administered herbal purgatives and threw urine on her, violent folk remedies intended to drive a fairy spirit out of a human body. Because the community had no clinical language for mental collapse, a horrific case of domestic abuse was carried out as a sincere communal act of salvation. On the night of March 14th, the panic was driven by a strict deadline. Folklore dictated that if the changeling wasn't expelled before midnight, the real Bridget would be lost to the other world forever. As the deadline hit, the violence escalated. Michael doused Bridget in lamp oil and ignited it, demanding one final time that she state her name to prove she was human. Even as the fire took hold, Michael's delusion remained intact. He told the witnesses that his real wife was about to ride down the hillside from the ring fort on a white horse, restored to him by the departure of the fairy. This violence served as the terminal end of an unchecked psychological collapse, one validated and weaponized by the community's own belief system. Authorities eventually discovered Bridget's body in a shallow grave near the ring fort. The trial that followed was a sensation, eventually birthing a haunting nursery rhyme that children in the region sang for generations. Are you a witch, or are you a fairy? Or are you the wife of Michael Cleary? Historically, fairy folklore functioned as a complete, pre-scientific explanatory system. It was the framework rural communities used to rationalize sudden illness, disability, and madness long before the advent of clinical psychology. Any system built on myth to explain human suffering possesses its own dark logic. When illness is interpreted as a monster, the logical solution is to destroy the host. Bridget Cleary died because a community lacking a vocabulary for mental illness used the only tool they had to rationalize destroying a woman they loved.